2 centuries ago, these sandy beaches were the birthplace of modern Australia. Later to become the historic main port of arrival for thousands of convicts and settlers from Britain. Today, Botany Bay isn't just a key Australian port, but one of the most densely developed industrial areas of Australia. Australia's biggest international and domestic air terminals operate at Botany, alongside 2 big container ports handling up to 4,000 shipping containers a day, or over 1.1 million a year. That's a third of Australia's entire container traffic. The vast bulk of this freight is distributed by wheeled juggernauts, thousands of huge container trucks that have turned Botany and the wide radius of suburbs around it into a daily clamour of traffic congestion, noise and carbon monoxide pollution, and a growing number of unsightly container terminals and storage depots. On top of that, tons of toxic industrial waste have seeped from the nearby Orica chemical plant and other industries around the port, and is moving toward Botany Bay itself and seeping through the groundwater aquifers and the Alexandria Canal to pollute areas like Surrey Hills, right on Sydney's doorstep. All in all, Botany Port has become an urban cancer, a poorly planned and serviced industrial infrastructure that's infecting the whole of South and Southwest Sydney with its problems.
I think this is a disaster in the making. It's a disaster from every respect.
And there's more to come. That infrastructure is about to double its size and capacity. The state Labor government under Premier Bob Carr almost completely neglected vital infrastructure development throughout New South Wales. Now, it's driving a 2-stage expansion project which will virtually triple the port's trade. The program, costing over $500 million, will add a 3rd container shipping terminal and probably 5 new berths to the Patrick and Brotherson wharves already there. It'll involve a major dredging operation to allow the expanded port to cater for the world's biggest container ships, giants of more than 15 stories in height and carrying over 6,000 containers each. That means one ship alone will unload more containers than the port handles in one whole day at the moment. There'll be new rail freight facilities too, a new railway spur to the terminal and 2 new rail sidings. The government's excuse for all this environmental disaster in the making is we'll lose valuable entrepot to Queensland and Victoria if Botany is not expanded. But this ignores the fact that Newcastle and Wollongong could provide this competitive boost themselves, and indeed have been crying out for similar major infrastructural investment to underwrite their post-industrial future. The government argues that the expansion will provide thousands of new jobs, ignoring the fact that modern ports are highly mechanised with very little labour. But what has chiefly been ignored is that the expansion program carries with it a potentially enormous social and environmental cost that could be felt throughout the Sydney metropolitan area in the future, an even bigger urban blight for the many thousands of people who live around it.
There'd be almost no suburb in Sydney that will escape. By our calculations, there'll be a minimum of 57 suburbs.
For one thing, it'll create an even bigger tyranny of the articulated truck. At present, 1.3 million containers are handled through the port each year. About 90% of these are transported, mainly by semi-trailer, to within a 40-kilometre radius of metropolitan Sydney. This enormous truck traffic has created a steadily worsening congestion of roads around the port, and of suburban streets and highways as far afield as Sydney's northern and western suburbs. That's not to mention the constant noise and carbon monoxide and particulate emissions. But the expansion project will cater for a tripling of the number of containers through Botany from 1.3 million to 3.2 million a year over the next 2 decades. That'll put thousands more container juggernauts on the already congested urban and suburban roads. The government says its rail expansion plan, the proposed new freight line and sidings, will eventually carry the bulk of the container traffic, radically reducing the need for trucks.
60% will still go by truck. That means there will be an enormous increase, about 2,000 trucks per day has been estimated, enormous increase in the number of very large trucks hauling freight through the streets of Sydney. This means that we're going to get the worst of all possible worlds, a massive convergence of trucks around the Enfield Logistics Centre and a use of trains 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, every 7 minutes, trains that will discharge a great amount of cancer-causing pollutants.
Also, the plan is to carry the freight by rail to Enfield and distribute it by trucks from there. But Enfield is already struggling to cope with the number of trucks choking its roads. Not only that, but the proposal means dumping a potentially disastrous threat to public health and security right in the middle of a densely populated area.
At Enfield is where the quarantine inspections will occur. So if there's any foreign material, any microbes, material, who knows what could be in the containers, they are now going to be open and inspected in a highly populated residential area of Sydney.
If you add the other major environmental questions surrounding the expansion, the ecological impact, the future becomes even more uncertain. The government says it'll maintain the water quality of the Penryn estuary close to the Patrick Wharves and transfer the much-used, long-established boat ramp there to a new site further along Foreshore Road and add a new public jetty and cycle path. It's also promised it'll expand the nearby salt marsh, protecting many species of migrating birds, and replace a depleted seagrass habitat. But the Penryn estuary is already so polluted by industrial waste that you're warned you can't swim there or eat fish taken from it. And aside from the industrial pollution in the area's groundwater, critics say the huge dredging operation could unlock the plume of toxic chemicals leaked by the Orica chemical plant. One of the government's own senior officers has described the Orica toxic plume as the most serious ground contamination issue in Australia.